This is the last lesson from the actual book I've been using, History of the Churches. And as I mentioned before, we'll have a couple of extra weeks of some additional material. But we're coming down to the end, and this actually is the last of from our book, the book that I've been following, History of the Churches by David Cloud. And where we've been covering revival and missions, and we're going to continue with that. With now, we covered revival mostly, and then also Moravian missions. But now we're going to look at, actually the main focus today would be both the first English Baptist missionary and then the first American Baptist missionary. And these are something you'd find in a Christian school textbook. So I'm going to maybe quiz before I tell you who they were, as to if anybody knows, first of all, who was the first Baptist missionary from England. What's that? Oh, Josiah here? Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if he knows, he knows. If anybody else knows. Josiah has his hand up here. William Carey. All right. And how about the first Baptist missionary sent from America, foreign missionary sent from America? So we're talking about foreign missions here. Anybody besides Josiah? How about Eliana? Yeah, Adoniram Judson. Good job. All right. So first Baptist missionary, foreign, so focus being on foreign missions from England, and that is where we'll start today. So prior to the 1700s, the churches were focused on evangelization of England and also the establishment of the churches there. They had faced persecution, they faced much difficulty, and they're trying to really establish their footing there in England. But eventually, it turned into a foreign focus once the persecution let up and they got better, more settled and established. They then turned their eyes on foreign missions. William Carey lived from 1761 to 1834. He was the first Baptist missionary from England, and he went to India. He grew up in the Anglican church, but he was saved at age 18 and joined a Baptist church. He was baptized by John Ryland on October 5th, 1783. And now remember that name, John Ryland, because we'll mention him here shortly. He had a zeal right away to preach the gospel. He became pastor of the Moulton Baptist Church in 1786 and the Harvey Lane Baptist Church of Leicester 3 years later. These were small churches, and Carey worked as a school teacher and a shoemaker to support his family. He had a burden for world missions. He made a world map out of leather and kept it in his shoe shop as a reminder to pray for the nations. He taught himself Greek, Hebrew, Dutch, and French. He was stirred by reading Voyages of Captain Cook, which described global exploration. He was also stirred by the missionary accounts of the Moravians and the biographies of John Eliot and David Brainerd, missionaries to the natives of America. In 1792, when I say missionaries and natives of America, that was both North and South America. In 1792, he wrote an inquiry into the obligation of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathen. He argued that Christ's great commission of Matthew 28 and Mark 16 is still in effect. The same year, he preached at the annual associational meeting, and his message from Isaiah 54, 2 and 3 had 2 points. And he was known for, some people still quote this, expect great things from God and attempt great things for God. William Carey was known for those points. And I think I misspoke. John Eliot and David Brainerd were primarily missionaries to the natives of America, as in the United States of America. But he said he's known for expect great things from God and attempt great things for God. That was his whole. Those were his 2 points, as far as missions were concerned. And he was at first frustrated by the strong Calvinism of the English particular Baptist churches of his day. So remember, we distinguish between particular Baptists and general Baptists. and they were the particular Baptists. Well, God has set aside, Jesus died for particular people, and only particular people will be saved. The general Baptists would say, no, Jesus died for all people, and so whoever believes on Christ will be saved. And so he was associated with some particular Baptist churches, and he was frustrated by that. At one of the associational meetings, Carey proposed that at the next meeting, they discuss the study of sending the gospel to the heathen. John Ryland, which I said remember that name, he's the one who baptized William Carey, the Baptist leader in charge of the meeting, sprang to his feet and ordered Carey to sit down, saying, "When God pleases to convert the heathen, he will do it without your aid or mine." And so that's an indication of the Calvinist stronghold and foothold in those particular Baptist churches. That was the attitude. And Andrew Fuller and John Sutcliffe supported Carey's call to missions. In October of 1792, the Baptist Missionary School was established. Carey, Fuller, and Sutcliffe were among the 12 founders, and John Ryland was also one of the founders, so maybe he had a change of heart and got involved in it. They met in the home of a widow and collected an offering of a little over 13 pounds, which wasn't a lot of money, and it wasn't the rich churches that were getting involved in this, it was the poorer churches that were involved more heartily into supporting the mission work. Carey sailed for India in 1793, but the British East India Company would not allow any missionary work. And the British East India Company at the time controlled India, and they would not allow any missionary work. After a few years of trouble, he moved to the Danish settlement of Serampore near Calcutta, where he was free to preach the gospel to the natives. He was joined by Joshua Marshman and William Ward, and they worked together for 25 years. Carey had his first missionary convert after 7 years of labor. 7 years of labor, first missionary convert. So after 7 years, now think about going 7 years without having a convert, but you know that, and when you get into the strongholds of where people are just entrenched in false religion and overall resistant to the gospel, in today's, unfortunately, there's been an emphasis on, well, if you don't have these multitudes of professions, you must be doing something wrong, is the mindset of some. But we'll find that even William Carey, and we'll also see Adoniram Judson, when they were pioneers into places that they were burdened and called to preach the gospel, they had to wait a while before there was really the fruit that the Lord brought. Much was accomplished at Serampore. They had the first Hindu convert to Christ. They published the Bible in 6 languages and the New Testament in 23 languages. Started on the first printing press in India on an organized scale. Established Serampore College to train Christian workers. Founded the Agricultural Society of India to help increase food production for the masses. Established the first medical mission in India and helped abolish the practice of sati, which was Hindu widows being burned alive on the funeral pyre of their dead husbands. And so there were a lot of just terrible customs and traditions based on the bondage of the Hindu religion. And you might be familiar with Amy Carmichael, and she was trying to rescue children from being just sent to the temples. And there were many just horrific things that took place because of the bondage of the false religion. And so William Carey helped to change some of that. And one of the interesting things about India is there are so many languages in India. So, India is a large country, very heavily populated country, and there are still a lot of languages, different languages spoken depending on the region of the country you're in. When I was in Bible college, they had their own equipment, not to print the John and Romans. They would get the John and Romans shipped there, but then they would put the covers on them, staple the covers on them there, and cut them, and they had the equipment for that. And I was happy to help with that. It's a wonderful thing to get involved in. It's such a great, encouraging thing to get your hands on the Word of God and actually have a hand in, okay, these are actually going out to somebody, and I'm having a part in putting these things together. That's just an exciting exciting thing to do. But they were putting together, they would do different languages, and one of them, that the projects they were working on when I was in college, was they were going to India in the language of Tamil. And that was one of the languages of India. But still a great need for the gospel in India. Thankful for the Christians that there are there, but there's a whole host. There's certain parts of the country that also they face a bit of persecution in India, whether it's Hindu or there's also Muslims in certain parts of India as well. So there's various aspects of persecution. Even though it's not government-sanctioned persecution as far as the national government, there's still portions of the country where they face more of that. Carey's philosophy had two negative long-term influences. First, he supported ecumenism and called for all denominations to come together for the cause of missions. Now, on the surface, that sounds really good, and that same philosophy is still alive and well today, that, hey, as long as we're just united for the sake of the gospel, let's just all come together. But eventually it results in a reduction of the gospel message, a watering down of the gospel message, not just the gospel message, but it's also then a compromise of other important doctrine. And so it sounds really good on the surface. Hey, as long as we're saved, as long as we all believe the same gospel, hey, let's just band together and work together and organize and get together. And that's really a common of what's done today in many circles, many parts of Christianity. But it ultimately results in apostasy. And what we see here is this resulted, his support of ecumenism and the call for denominations to come together for the cause of missions resulted in the World Missionary Conference in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1910, which led to the formation of the World Council of Churches, which the World Council of Churches is radically apostate and ecumenical. He also emphasized education too much. Now, it's good, no problem necessarily having a school, starting a school, but the school he founded quickly became apostate. And so David Cloud, who wrote the book that these lessons are based on, he visited that school in 1982, and he found that the head of the New Testament department believes that Hindus go to heaven. And the school also has close ties with the Roman Catholic institution across the street. And so that school is nothing like it would have been founded with its focus on the gospel message and evangelization. And unfortunately, that is oftentimes, when you get outside of what God calls the pillar and ground of truth, and you get the focus off of sound and New Testament churches, this is usually what happens. There's ecumenism, and then there's eventually apostasy. And we've seen that repeated over and over and over again. But it sounds really good. It's very appealing because, hey, if we band together, we can do something bigger. Bigger sounds better. So let's all band together. Hey, what's one small church going to be able to do? Let's all band together. Now, it's okay to cooperate and fellowship with other churches and for the cause of missions. For example, the Carneys, we support the Carneys. They have a mission agency, so to speak. It's called Global Independent Baptist Missions, which is part of Global Independent Baptist Fellowship. But it is based on a group of churches that are of like faith who agree on not just, we're just banding together for the cause of missions, but it's simply just a way to facilitate them getting to the field as far as the finances. And we send the finances to GIBM, but at the same time, he's sent from under the authority of his church in Holbrook. That is his sending church. That's the authority. That's the sending authority, is that local church. And so that mission agency doesn't have authority over me, but that mission agency was, it's simply multiple churches of like faith agreeing on a doctrinal statement, not just, hey, we believe the gospel, but agreeing on a doctrinal statement. And they're saying, let's help facilitate this and of getting people out to the field. And so there can be a place for that as long as it's done properly, as long as the authority of the church is respected and followed as far as the missionaries are concerned. But there's a difference between that and then just getting together for the sake of let's just focus on the fundamentals of the gospel, and as long as we're united in the gospel, hey, nothing else matters, and that leads to compromise and apostasy eventually, even though it sounds really appealing. Now we go from the first English Baptist missionary to the first American Baptist missionary here, speaking of foreign missions. And then we said that was Adoniram Judson. And the first missionary society was formed in Massachusetts in 1807 and sent J.M. Peck to the far west to preach the gospel. Adoniram Judson lived from 1788 to 1850. He was the first missionary sent from America to a foreign land. Judson became burdened to preach the gospel in Burma. He was the son of a congregational pastor and a brilliant student. He learned to read at age 3 in Greek and Latin by age 10. He graduated from Rhode Island College at the top of his class. He fell in with the wrong crowd and renounced the faith of his parents. He was influenced to deism by a friend. His friend was named Jacob Eames, E-A-M-E-S. He quit college and determined to travel to New York to go into the entertainment business. One evening he sought shelter from a rainstorm in an inn where the only room left was located next to one in which a young man was dying. All during the night, Adoniram heard this young man's moans and torments. In the morning he inquired of the innkeeper and learned that the young man had died and that his name was Jacob Eames. Or Ames, I think it's Eames, E-A-M-E-S. And so this was the one who had influenced him away from the gospel, but he's now hearing him being just tormented as he's passing away. Having been awakened to the thought of eternity and the brevity of this life, Adoniram went back home and attended Andover Theological Seminary. There he was converted through reading a book by the Puritan writer Thomas Boston titled Human Nature in its Fourfold State. In late 1811, the Congregational Churches formed the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. This was the first foreign missions agency in the United States. The first two missionaries under this board were Adoniram Judson and Luther Rice. Now, how is this? What does this have to do with him being the first Baptist missionary, sent to a foreign land? Well, just wait. We're going to find out. Judson married Anne Hasseltine just 2 weeks before they set sail for India on February 5th, 1812. On their way to India, they studied the Bible and concluded that baptism is for believers only. The Baptists started a missionary society called the General Convention of the Baptist Denominations in the United States. Let me go back here just a moment. So they're on their way to India, and of course it's a long trip. You don't just hop on an airplane and fly there. But they're studying the Bible and concluded that baptism is for believers only. And by the way, if you study your Bible, that is the conclusion you come to if you honestly study your Bible. When they arrived in Serampore, India, they were baptized by William Ward, a co-worker with William Carey. Luther Rice sailed on a different ship but came to the same conclusion. He returned to the States and traveled to Baptist churches to challenge them for missions. The Baptists started a missionary society called the General Convention of the Baptist Denomination in the United States for Foreign Missions. This was the mission agency of the American Baptist churches in both the North and South until the Southern Baptist Convention was formed in 1845. And by the way, I'm not necessarily endorsing all these big mission agencies that all these churches we're doing. I think the focus of missions ought to be primarily out of the each individual church, certain levels of fellowship, but sometimes what happens is, and this is just the temptation, it doesn't always happen this way, but if there's a big convention, a big organization, then the organization becomes the higher institution, the institution of focus, as opposed to the churches. And the churches are always the ones who should have primacy over any other type of organization that is set up. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to add some more to this lesson series is that we're not going to, in this book that we've been going through with David Cloud's book, he stops here with Adoniram Judson at the end of that book. Now, he's got a newer version, so maybe he goes into more after that, but I'm not sure exactly. I have the older version. But there was primarily, you have what is today the American Baptist churches. There's actually a denomination called American Baptist churches, which are kind of congregational light, basically. They're not, they've been pretty compromised for a long time, most of them. And there was a reason that there was a split with North and South, and we'll like I said, we're going to cover that. I want to cover that to kind of get us up to speed here in the United States, or up to date here of what took place in the United States. Now, some of that I think also had to do with slavery, but it was also the Southern Baptist Convention ended up being doctrinally more conservative than the Southern ones ended up being doctrinally more conservative than the Northern ones. So that's why you have the American Baptist churches today not being very strong doctrinally. Now, Southern Baptists don't have much going for them anymore either, but they're still, on paper, doctrinally more sound, but in practice, not so much for a lot of the churches. Just to give you an example of that, Rick Warren is technically Southern Baptist affiliated, and Stephen Furtick's church is Southern Baptist affiliated, which I didn't really know that until more recently. I thought he was just a non-denominational, kind of more Pentecostal, charismatic type, but no, he's actually Southern Baptist affiliated. Well, that's a surprise. But anyway, like I said, we'll get into some of that later after revival meetings. We won't have the lesson next week. So they started this missionary society, and so the point being here is that the influence of Luther Rice, the influence coming back to America, was that the churches then had more of an awareness and a focus on foreign missions. And really, I think the same thing has happened in the last 20 to 30 years regarding here among independent Baptists in America regarding starting churches. There was really not a lot of focus on that as far as like a formal push for church planting in America but as the years have gone on, more and more have seen the need for that and are supportive of that. Judson's 67-year-old father resigned his congregational pastorate and was scripturally baptized along with his wife and daughter. The Judsons settled in Burma in July of 1813. For the first few years, they didn't have any converts and faced many hardships. Rangoon was filthy and unhealthy. They were often sick of tropical diseases, and they lost their first two children during these years. The government officials were corrupt and fickle. People showed no interest in the gospel. The government was opposed to any citizen changing religions. I mean, that's a pretty long list of difficulties and barriers to face going there. In April of 1819, he set up a zayat where he held meetings and discussed the gospel with the people. So this was a meeting place, a teaching place, and the Buddhists did this. So they would have a meditation room, but he didn't use it for that. But he set something up these were shelters, and there were many of them in Rangoon, where people could rest there, discuss the day's events, just kind of get away from their activities of the day and just get away from there. They would listen to Buddhist teachers, so he set up one where he would discuss the gospel with people. After 6 years, in 1819, they had their first convert. He was baptized in June, and two others were baptized in November. And the British attacked Burma in 1823, and Judson was thrown into prison. He was there for 2 years and 3 months under terrible conditions. His wife remained free and helped him survive. During this time, God miraculously protected the unfinished manuscript of the Burmese Bible translation. He was released from prison in 1826 when the war ended. Judson was deeply... jumping ahead here. So he was finally released when the war ended. His wife Anne died in October of 1826, and their daughter Maria died a few months later. Judson was deeply depressed and discouraged. He moved into a little hut in the jungle and spent 40 days with the Lord, and it was after this time that his work began to prosper. 1834, Judson married Sarah Boardman, the widow of a missionary, and they had 6 children who survived. And in 1840, Judson completed the translation of the Burmese Bible after 21 years of labor. Sarah died in 1845, and Judson traveled to America for the first time in 38 years. Think about what a change there must have been. And not my wife's blood uncle, but close enough to call him uncle, and her aunt, call them aunt and uncle. They were missionaries for many years in Japan. And how many years was it till they
just over 30.
that they weren't in the U.S. or?
They did furloughs during that
Oh,
time.
okay. What was?
Not been back for an extended.
It was a longer time. Yeah. So we had the opportunity. He flew into Providence, and several years ago, and we were living in Connecticut, and so given the opportunity to see him, and he came back, and we met at the mall right in downtown Providence. There's a mall there. And he was really taken aback at what he saw with the people walking around, and just, it was not the same as when he left, as far as the appearance of the people, just the whole, it was quite a surprise to him, and very different. So think about, that would be a lot. 38 years is a long time to go from not being in America and then going back. While in America, Judson met and married Emily Chubbuck. They went to Burma in 1846, and Adoniram Judson died in 1850. At the time of his death, there were 63 Baptist churches in Burma with 7,000 baptized believers. And the work, the Baptist work is still going on in Burma today, Myanmar. And there's a church in upstate New York that has a missions, I guess you'd call it a missions agency or just a ministry called Golden Land Baptist Missions. And that is their focus area is Myanmar and Old Burma. And there's still a good number of believers over there, and the work is still going on. So there's the one who directs that ministry, but then also they have missionaries who actually live over there who are trying to reach the people. And that's why, especially to me, there's a greater connection when it comes to praying for Myanmar because of the coup that took place there, and it makes things more precarious for the people. And so they need a lot of prayer because of the challenges there with the military ruling things. And then, of course, you still have COVID and the various ways things are being handled with that. And so a lot of challenges, but they're still trying to reach the people, and there's still a lot of work going on in Burma today. Any questions? Denise?
I don't know if it was Judson or Carey, previous slide. On their way over to where they were going, they decided that baptism was what you need to do.
For believers.
For believers.
Right.
And I find it interesting because, I don't understand. What they were on their way.
Yeah.
And they finally decided, and also the Luther Rice.
Yes.
I think you said on his way.
Yes.
He decided. I wonder if before they got started on their ship travel, if they decided, well, now let's look at the subject of baptism and see what we.
Yeah,
I just find that very interesting.
It is.
It wasn't decided before they left.
And I think it's possible that they were, when they were in the United States, they were part of the congregational churches, and that's what they knew, and that's just what they practiced. But then they're going on it's a life-changing event, a life-changing journey, separating from all of that, physically separating from that. And I don't know how long the trip took, but they would have quite a bit of time on the ship, on the whatever boat they're on, and quite a bit of time to read and study. So could they have had that in their minds already? Maybe. It could be they were just they could have just been studying.
Put it on their minds to.
Yeah. Did you?
Well, with Adoniram being raised as the son of a congregational pastor,
Yeah.
apparently years before he had questioned his father
Hmm.
about several of the doctrines and was basically don't you dare question, we don't do that.
Ah.
And that was one of the things that actually caused him to turn away from the faith later, when he was influenced by someone else, was that, if my father can't even answer my questions, and then he turned away, and so forth. And when he came back, he was willing to, he got saved and was willing to submit to what he learned, but he always had this question that nagging at the back of his mind. So when he and his wife was also, I believe, she was in a Congregationalist family, and it was a very strong Congregationalist family. When they left, he said, well, he just thought, well, it was several months on the ship.
Yeah.
I'm going to study and learn all I can. We'll get into the Bible. I'll study the languages. And he decided, I'm going to look at this because he'd had this question for years about baptism. And on the way over, as he studied it, he came to the conclusion, that's not for infants. You don't baptize babies in the Bible. And he told his wife his conclusion, and she told him, I will die before I will become a Baptist. How dare you ask me to leave the Congregationalist church? And he backed off and didn't say anything, and then she decided, maybe I better look at it myself, and started separately from him studying what the Bible said, and came back and went, this is horrible, you're right, we can't be Congregationalists anymore, because it actually does mean baptism is only for believers. And unknown to them, Luther Rice was going through the same thing. Now what prompted him, I don't know, but reading Adoniram Judson's biography, that was kind of the events that led up to him studying that.
So she decided that before they landed?
Yeah, before they landed, she also came to the same conclusion. Hence, when they landed, they found another missionary that was a Baptist that could baptize them.
Yeah.
And then Judson's father, 65
Right.
years old.
Right. He eventually.
The problem was they had to tell the churches back in the States, we're no longer Congregationalists, so now all of their missionary support disappeared because it was all from Congregationalist churches. That's why Luther Rice went back to the Baptist churches. He come to the same conclusion. He got baptized, and he said, we aren't going to be able to survive in this land because we have no missionary support coming in because they're not going to support a Baptist missionary. So he went back and said, I got to get the Baptist churches to support the Judsons or they're not going to be able to stay there. And that's what he spent the rest of his life doing, traveling the States trying to convince the Baptist churches they needed to be part of missions. And that was the only way the Judsons ever stayed there. They would never have survived if Luther Rice hadn't gone back and gotten the support for them.
There you go. She read the biography. I didn't. So. You just finished reading it. Wow.
That's why she knew he was the first Baptist.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, so there you go. That's a very, very interesting story of how they ended up changing. And then to think that a 67-year-old Congregationalist pastor would have a change of heart, that's really speaks a lot. That says a lot.